Sometimes the dead don't come back with footsteps. Sometimes they come back with one bark in the dark. Rain hammered the windows of Royal Melbourne Hospital hard enough to sound like gravel against glass, while somewhere beyond the city lights, thunder rolled low across Port Phillip Bay like distant artillery. Inside Ward C, Senior Tactical Officer Ethan Calloway snapped awake with a gasp that tore through the silence of the room. The heart monitor beside him spiked wildly. Pain rushed through his ribs like fire beneath skin, but that was not what made his hands shake. It was the sound. One bark. Deep. Hoarse. Familiar. It cracked through the police radio someone had left charging beside his bed, buried under static for less than a second before the channel went dead again. Yet Ethan felt it hit his chest harder than the blast that nearly killed him 2 nights earlier. His breathing stopped. His pale fingers tightened around the hospital blanket. Then slowly, painfully, he turned his head toward the small radio blinking beside the rain-streaked glass. "Rex," he whispered. The room smelled of antiseptic and damp wool blankets. But underneath it all, Ethan swore he could still remember the scent of smoke from Docklands Pier 9. Burnt timber. Salt water. Diesel. Fear. His pulse quickened again. The nurses said he had been unconscious for nearly 18 hours after the warehouse collapse. Concussion. Cracked ribs. Severe exhaustion. Lucky to be alive. But Ethan did not feel lucky. Not without his partner. A flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second, revealing the faded German shepherd tattoo wrapped around Ethan's right forearm. The ink had blurred slightly over the years, but the eyes were still unmistakable. Amber. Loyal. Watching. Just like Rex's real ones. Ethan pushed himself upright with a groan, the movement sending sharp pain through his side. Outside the corridor, rubber soles squeaked against polished hospital floors while muted voices drifted through the half-open door. Melbourne never truly slept, not even during storms. Somewhere down below, tram bells echoed faintly through the wet streets. But Ethan heard none of it now. Only that bark replaying inside his head from the open emergency channel. Rex was alive. He knew it the same way sailors know a storm is coming before the clouds arrive. Not logic. Not hope. Something deeper. The hospital door creaked open. Sergeant Mia Hart stepped inside, carrying a damp police jacket folded over one arm. Her blonde hair clung slightly to her forehead from the rain outside, and exhaustion sat heavily beneath her eyes. She stopped the moment she saw Ethan sitting upright. "Easy, mate," she said softly. "Doctor said you shouldn't be moving yet." Ethan ignored the warning immediately. "Did you hear it?" Mia frowned. "Hear what?" Another flash of lightning cut across the room. Ethan's jaw tightened and pointed toward the radio. The bark. Silence settled between them. Mia looked down briefly before stepping closer to the bed. Her expression changed in the smallest way possible, but Ethan caught it. Police officers became experts at reading grief long before they learned to speak about it. "Ethan," she began carefully. "Search crews went back this morning." He stared at her without blinking. Rainwater slid slowly down the hospital window behind him like tears crawling through glass. "We found this near the collapse." Mia reached into her jacket pocket and placed something gently on the bedside table. A blackened K9 collar. The leather edges were scorched. The metal tag bent slightly from heat. "Rex, Victoria Police K9 Unit." Ethan's entire body went still. For a moment, even the storm outside seemed to fade away. He reached for the collar slowly, fingertips trembling as they brushed against wet ash still caught in the stitching. Memory hit him instantly. Rex sprinting beside him along the docks at sunrise. Rex shoving his nose into Ethan's hand, demanding attention after training drills. Rex sitting silently beside him on sleepless nights after failed operations neither man nor dog could fully forget. "No," Ethan whispered. Mia's voice softened further. "Mate, the fire spread too fast." Ethan closed his hand around the collar. His throat tightened hard enough to hurt. He should have believed it. Every report said the same thing. Structural collapse. Chemical. Accelerants. No safe access to the southern loading platform. No confirmed survival window inside the warehouse. But then another sound broke faintly through the radio static from Mia's jacket pocket. One bark. Distant. Raw. Alive. Ethan's head snapped toward the window again, so fast the monitor leads tugged sharply against his chest. His eyes widened. "That's him." Mia froze. "Ethan, that's Rex." His voice cracked this time, Not from pain, but certainty. Somewhere beyond the rain and neon reflections of Melbourne's soaked midnight streets, somewhere near the sealed ruins of Pier 9, a German shepherd was still breathing. The storm deepened over Melbourne just after midnight, turning the hospital windows into trembling sheets of silver. Ethan Calloway sat frozen against the raised bed, while the scorched collar remained clenched tightly in his hand. The leather still smelled faintly of smoke and seawater. Not death. Not goodbye. Something inside him refused to let go. Sergeant Mia Hart pulled a chair beside the bed and lowered herself into it slowly, exhaustion weighing down every movement. Her soaked jacket dripped quietly onto the linoleum floor. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Somewhere down the corridor, an elderly man coughed. A trolley rattled past beneath the pale hospital lights. The ordinary sounds of the night felt strangely distant now, as though the world itself had stepped back to listen. Ethan stared at the rain beyond the glass. "How many crews searched the pier?" he asked quietly. Mia rubbed her forehead. 3 emergency teams. Fire rescue. Marine unit. Police divers checked the lower platforms near the waterline. Ethan's jaw tightened. And nobody found a body. Mia hesitated. That silence alone was enough. Ethan looked down at the collar again. His thumb brushed over the bent metal tag, while memories surfaced one after another like drifting wreckage. Rex racing through obstacle courses during training outside Geelong. Rex refusing to leave Ethan's side after a panic attack that came out of nowhere 3 winters ago. Rex sleeping with his head pressed against Ethan's boots during long overnight stakeouts near Footscray Docks. The dog had never once abandoned him. Not once. "You know what the strange thing is?" Mia finally murmured. Ethan lifted his eyes. "What?" She leaned back in the chair, watching the rain crawl down the window. The firefighters said they heard barking after the collapse. Ethan's heartbeat stumbled hard. Mia continued softly. "Only briefly. One of them thought it came from underneath the southern loading platform." Ethan sat forward despite the pain ripping through his ribs. "Why did nobody tell me this?" "Because the structure was unstable and half underwater after the sprinklers burst. They thought it was echoes. Metal shifting. People hear strange things after disasters." Ethan shook his head immediately. "Not Rex." Another silence settled over the room. Then Mia exhaled slowly through her nose. "You really believe he is still out there?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "I know he is." Lightning flashed again outside, illuminating the faded bruises along Ethan's face. He looked older tonight. Not because of injury. Because hope hurts when the world tells you to bury it. Mia studied him carefully. She had worked alongside Ethan for nearly 6 years. She had seen him stay calm through armed standoffs, storms at sea, missing child searches stretching into dawn. But she had never seen him look like this. Fragile. Haunted. Alive only because one impossible sound had reached him through the rain. "Dr. Walsh said you should not even be sitting upright," she muttered gently. Ethan ignored the comment completely. "What time did the crew stop searching?" "Around 7 this evening." "And the pier is sealed now?" Mia nodded once. Ethan swung his legs slowly over the side of the bed. Pain shot through his abdomen hard enough to steal his breath for a second. The monitor beside him began protesting immediately with sharp electronic beeps. "Mate," Mia warned quietly. "Do not do this." Ethan planted his feet carefully onto the cold hospital floor. "If Rex is alive, he is injured. Exhausted. Probably trapped somewhere near the water. Ethan. He would stay close to the last place he saw me." Mia stood immediately as Ethan reached for the 4-line attached to his arm. "You are in no condition to go wandering around Docklands in this weather." Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, and the pain behind his eyes made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "He came back for me," he whispered. "I heard him." Before Mia could answer, another sound broke faintly through the open police channel on Mia's shoulder radio. Both of them froze. It was distant this time, barely more than a rough echo buried beneath rain, voices, and static, but unmistakable. A bark. Mia's eyes widened slightly. Ethan closed his eyes for one fragile second, relief washing through him so suddenly it almost broke him apart. "See," he breathed. "That is him." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing sideways across the city skyline, while ambulance lights flickered blue and red against flooded streets below. Somewhere beyond those lights lay Docklands Pier 9, blackened and silent beside the harbor water. Ethan could almost picture it now. twisted steel beams, flooded concrete, smoke stains climbing the old warehouse walls. And somewhere inside that ruin, Rex waiting, holding on. The thought alone sent a sharp ache through Ethan's chest, stronger than any physical wound. Slowly, he pulled the adhesive monitor pads from his skin one by one. The machine beside him erupted into warning tones immediately. Mia stared at him in disbelief. "You are serious?" Ethan grabbed the folded police jacket hanging at the edge of the chair. "I am not leaving him there." Footsteps echoed suddenly outside the room as nurses reacted to the alarms. Mia cursed softly under her breath and moved quickly toward the door, peering into the corridor. "You have about 30 seconds before this place fills with staff," she muttered. Ethan struggled into the jacket carefully, his breathing uneven from pain. The fabric smelled faintly of rain, coffee, and Melbourne streets at night. Familiar things. Real things. Things connected to life outside hospital walls. Mia looked back at him once more. "This is completely insane." Ethan gave the faintest nod. "Probably." Another bark cracked through the radio again. Clearer now. Raw. Hoarse. Waiting. Mia closed her eyes briefly, like someone losing an argument with fate itself. Then she reached into her pocket and tossed Ethan a set of car keys. "My Uda is in the underground car park," she said quietly. "Fuel tank is half full." Ethan caught the keys with trembling fingers. "Mia." "If anyone asks," she interrupted softly, "I never saw you leave." For the first time since waking up, something inside Ethan loosened slightly. Not relief. Not safety. Just the smallest flicker of hope returning to a man who had spent too many years learning how to survive loss. Outside, thunder rolled across the harbor again, while somewhere beyond the rain-soaked city, a loyal German shepherd waited in the dark. The underground car park beneath Royal Melbourne Hospital smelled of wet concrete, engine oil, and cold night air drifting in through the entrance ramp. Rainwater trickled through cracks in the ceiling, tapping softly against parked vehicles like nervous fingers. Ethan Calloway moved carefully beside Sergeant Mia Hart's dark blue Uda, one arm pressed against his ribs, while the other gripped the door handle hard enough for his knuckles to pale. Every breath hurt. Every movement reminded him that his body should still be lying in a hospital bed. But somewhere beyond the city lights, Rex was alive. That truth burned stronger than pain now. Mia tossed a waterproof police torch onto the passenger seat before climbing behind the wheel. "You are bleeding through the bandages again," she muttered while starting the engine. Ethan glanced down briefly at the faint stains spreading beneath his gray hospital shirt. "I have had worse." "That is not the reassuring statement you think it is." The Uda rolled slowly up the spiral exit ramp and emerged into the storm-soaked streets of Melbourne. Rain battered the windscreen in violent bursts while the wipers struggled to keep pace. Neon signs shimmered across flooded tram tracks. Traffic lights reflected red and gold against puddles deep enough to swallow tires halfway. The city looked exhausted tonight, quiet in the strange way large cities become during storms, as though millions of people were holding their breath at once. Ethan stared through the passenger window toward the distant harbor skyline, barely visible beneath sheets of rain. His pulse had not settled since leaving the hospital. Every few seconds, he listened for it again. That bark, that impossible sound cutting through darkness like a flare. Mia kept both hands tight on the steering wheel. "You still have not told me exactly what happened in that warehouse." Ethan remained silent for a moment. Thunder rolled overhead, low and heavy. Then finally he spoke. "We received an anonymous tip about human trafficking moving through Docklands cargo routes." Mia frowned slightly. "I thought it was meant to be a routine inspection." "So did we." Ethan swallowed hard against the dryness in his throat. "Rex alerted almost immediately after we entered Pier 9. Something was wrong." He kept focusing on the lower loading bays near the water. Rain hammered harder against the roof of the Uda as they crossed the Bolt Bridge. The harbor below reduced to shifting black water beneath fog and stormlight. Ethan's voice grew quieter. Then the chemical storage alarms triggered. Mia glanced sideways at him. "The explosion." Ethan nodded once. Memory flickered behind his eyes in jagged pieces. Smoke swallowing corridors. Emergency lights flashing red through thick haze. Rex barking somewhere ahead inside the confusion. "I remember Rex turning back," Ethan whispered. "That was the last thing I saw before the collapse." His fingers tightened unconsciously around the burnt collar still resting in his lap. Mia noticed it immediately. You think he went back for someone? Ethan looked toward the rain streaking across the glass. That dog would walk through fire for a stranger if he thought they were afraid. Neither of them spoke after that. The city slowly thinned around them as they neared Docklands. Shipping cranes rose from the mist ahead like giant skeletons against the storm clouds. Floodlights reflected off stacked cargo containers and wet asphalt. Somewhere nearby, a foghorn moaned low across the harbor water, deep and mournful enough to sound almost human. Mia parked beside a temporary police barrier roughly 200 meters from Pier 9. Emergency tape fluttered violently in the wind while abandoned rescue vehicles sat dark beneath the rain. The fire had been extinguished hours ago, yet the air still carried the bitter smell of burnt timber and melted plastic. Ethan stepped out of the Uda carefully and immediately winced as cold wind slammed into him. Rain soaked through his clothes within seconds. His boots splashed through shallow water pooling along the cracked concrete roadway leading toward the pier. Mia grabbed the torch and hurried beside him. Easy, mate. Ethan barely heard her. He was listening. Somewhere in the distance, metal creaked softly beneath the wind. Water slapped against pylons beneath the docks. Loose chains rattled against poles. Then suddenly Ethan stopped walking. Mia nearly collided with him. What? She whispered. Ethan tilted his head slightly toward the darkness ahead. There it was again. Faint. Hoarse. A bark. This time unmistakably closer. Not imagined. Not memory. Real. Mia's face drained slightly of color beneath the harbor lights. Ethan's entire body stiffened. Rex, he breathed. Without waiting, he pushed forward through the rain, limping heavily now toward the damaged loading zone beyond the barriers. Floodlights illuminated the ruined warehouse ahead in broken flashes. Half the roof had collapsed inward. Twisted steel beams jutted from the structure like black ribs, while rainwater poured steadily through the shattered upper levels. The sight hit Ethan harder than expected. This place had nearly buried them both alive. Yet somewhere inside these ruins, loyalty still refused to die. Mia grabbed his arm gently. Wait. Ethan turned. She pointed toward the southern edge of the pier where darkness pooled beneath the lower platform supports near the waterline. A shape moved there, low to the ground. Watching them, Ethan's breath caught instantly. For one impossible second, everything else disappeared. The rain, the pain, the ruined warehouse. All of it faded beneath the sight of two amber eyes reflecting faintly beneath the dock lights. The shape remained motionless, half hidden by shadow and drifting mist. Then slowly, weakly, a tail struck once against wet concrete. Ethan's knees nearly gave out beneath him. Rex. The German shepherd tried to stand. His movements were uneven and exhausted. Rain darkened his sable coat almost black beneath the harbor lights, and one side of his fur looked singed near the shoulder. But he was alive. Alive. Rex took one shaky step forward before stopping suddenly and turning his head back toward the darkness behind him beneath the platform. Ethan noticed it immediately. The dog was guarding something. Rain swept sideways across Docklands Pier 9, while the ruined warehouse groaned softly beneath the storm like something wounded and exhausted refusing to collapse completely. Ethan Calloway stood frozen in the middle of the flooded concrete, unable to breathe properly as those amber eyes stared back at him from beneath the loading platform. Rex looked thinner, older somehow. His sable coat clung heavily to his body beneath the rain, darkened by seawater and ash, and one shoulder trembled from strain each time he shifted his weight. But his eyes had not changed. Loyal, steady, alive. Ethan took one careful step forward. Hey, mate. His voice cracked instantly. The German shepherd's ears twitched at the sound. For a second the dog tried to move faster, tail striking weakly against the concrete again, but pain stopped him halfway. Ethan dropped to one knee despite the agony shooting through his ribs and opened his arms slightly. Come here, Rex. The dog limped forward at last. Not running, not charging, just moving with the exhausted determination of something that had spent too long surviving alone. Rainwater splashed beneath his paws while thunder rolled over the harbor. Then suddenly Rex reached him. Ethan barely caught the shepherd before the dog collapsed against his chest with a deep, shuddering breath. The impact nearly knocked the air from Ethan's lungs, but he wrapped both arms around the dog immediately anyway, holding him tighter than he had held anything in years. Wet fur, smoke, salt water. Beneath all of it, the familiar scent of home. Ethan lowered his forehead against Rex's neck and closed his eyes hard. For several seconds, he could not speak at all. His entire body shook silently while Rex pressed weakly closer, one paw sliding across Ethan's leg like reassurance. Mia turned away slightly beneath the rain, giving them the privacy of grief finally loosening its grip. Ethan swallowed hard before whispering against the dog's fur, "You stubborn idiot." Rex let out a faint sound somewhere between a sigh and a whine. Not fear. Relief. The kind shared only between souls who had already carried each other through darkness before. Ethan pulled back just enough to examine him properly. Burn marks along the shoulder. Cuts across the paws. Fur singed near the ears. But none of it explained why the dog had stayed hidden beneath the pier instead of seeking help. Then Rex lifted his head suddenly and looked back toward the darkness beneath the platform again. A low sound rumbled softly in his throat. Alert. Protective. Ethan noticed immediately. There is someone under there. Mia stepped closer, raising the torch carefully toward the shadows beneath the dock supports. Rainwater dripped steadily from rusted steel beams, while seawater churned darkly below. At first, Ethan saw nothing except broken pallets and debris washed against the pylons. Then the torchlight caught movement. Small, curled against the concrete wall beneath a tarp half collapsed by rain. Ethan's stomach tightened. Jesus. Mia moved first, crouching carefully near the lower platform entrance. Police, she called gently into the darkness. You are safe now. A small figure shifted beneath the tarp. A boy, maybe 10 years old. Thin, pale, wrapped tightly inside Rex's body warmth as though the shepherd had shielded him there for hours. Maybe longer. The child blinked weakly against the torchlight, frightened eyes darting toward the storm outside. Rex immediately struggled upright again despite exhaustion and limped back toward the boy protectively, positioning himself halfway between the child and the open dock. Ethan stared at the dog in disbelief. You stayed with him. Mia knelt carefully beside the tarp while rain hammered the pier above them. Hey there, buddy, she said softly. Can you tell me your name? The boy's lips trembled from cold. Noah. His voice was barely audible beneath the storm. Ethan moved closer slowly, ignoring the sharp pain spreading through his ribs again. Noah looked exhausted, clothes soaked through, cheeks pale beneath harbor grime and rainwater. But he was alive, because Rex had not left him. Mia removed her own waterproof jacket immediately and wrapped it around the child's shoulders. How long have you been here, Noah? The boy swallowed hard. Since the fire. Ethan and Mia exchanged a stunned glance. Nearly 20 hours. Noah's eyes shifted toward Rex beside him. The shepherd remained pressed protectively against the child's side, even now, ears alert toward every sound outside the platform. He kept barking whenever I tried to sleep. Noah whispered weakly. He would not let me sleep too deeply in the cold. Ethan felt something tighten painfully inside his chest at those words. Rex had done exactly what tactical K-9 units were trained to do during rescue operations. Preserve consciousness. Maintain warmth. Guard survivors until help arrived. Even injured. Even alone. Even abandoned beneath a ruined pier during a winter storm. Noah reached down carefully and rested trembling fingers against Rex's damp neck fur. I thought he was going to leave, the boy admitted quietly. But he kept coming back every time the thunder got loud. Ethan looked at Rex then, really looked at him. The exhaustion in the dog's body was impossible to hide now. The trembling legs. The uneven breathing. The cuts washed pink by rainwater. Yet somehow the shepherd still kept watch over the frightened child instead of resting. Loyalty stronger than instinct. Stronger than pain. Mia touched the radio clipped to her belt immediately. Dispatch, this is Sergeant Hart. We have located one missing juvenile survivor at Pier 9. Repeat, survivor located alive. Static crackled through the storm before voices erupted urgently across the line. But Ethan barely heard them. He remained kneeling beside Rex while rainwater streamed down both of them beneath the broken dock lights. Slowly he reached into his jacket pocket and removed the burnt collar he had carried from the hospital. Rex lifted his tired eyes immediately the moment he saw it. Ethan's throat tightened again. Thought I lost. You, mate. Carefully, gently, he fastened the damaged collar back around the German shepherd's neck where it belonged. Rex leaned into his hand the moment the buckle clicked shut. A tiny gesture, barely noticeable, but Ethan felt it all the way down to his soul. Somewhere out across Port Phillip Bay, another foghorn echoed low through the storm while emergency sirens began growing louder in the distance. Help was finally coming. Yet beneath the ruined pier, beside the trembling boy and the exhausted shepherd who refused to abandon him, Ethan suddenly understood something simple and sacred. Some partners do not stay because they are trained to. They stay because love leaves them no other choice. The first rescue vehicles arrived through the storm 5 minutes later, their flashing lights spilling blue and amber across the flooded docks like restless ghosts moving through rain. Emergency workers hurried beneath waterproof jackets, while radios crackled sharply through the cold harbor air. Yet beneath the ruined loading platform, time seemed to move differently. Slower, softer somehow. Ethan Calloway remained kneeling beside Rex with one hand buried deep in the shepherd's soaked fur, while Noah sat wrapped inside Sergeant Mia Hart's jacket, shivering quietly against the concrete wall. The rain had eased slightly now, falling in long silver streaks through the broken beams overhead. Somewhere nearby, seawater knocked rhythmically against rusted pylons beneath the dock. Rex lifted his head the moment paramedics approached the platform entrance. His ears twitched sharply despite exhaustion. Protective instinct had not faded. One medic slowed immediately after spotting the German shepherd's posture. "Easy there, mate," the older man murmured gently. Ethan rested a calming hand against Rex's neck. "It is all right. They are here to help." Rex's amber eyes remained fixed on Noah for another few seconds before finally relaxing slightly. Even then, he refused to move far from the boy. Mia crouched beside Noah while a female paramedic wrapped a thermal blanket around his shoulders. "You did brilliantly, buddy," Mia said softly. Noah looked toward Rex again instead of answering. "He kept me warm," the boy whispered. His small voice sounded fragile beneath the storm and sirens. "Every time I got cold, he pushed closer." Ethan swallowed hard. The paramedic examining Noah glanced toward Rex with visible disbelief. "That dog stayed under here with him this whole time?" Ethan nodded quietly. "That is who he is." Another emergency worker approached carrying medical supplies, while rainwater dripped steadily from his helmet. He crouched beside Rex carefully, checking the shepherd's shoulder wound beneath the singed fur. Rex remained still through the examination, though his breathing looked increasingly strained now that the adrenaline keeping him upright had begun fading. Ethan noticed immediately. "How bad?" The medic exhaled softly. "He is exhausted more than anything. Mild burns. Cuts across the paws. Probably dehydrated." Rex shifted weakly against Ethan's side, leaning into him almost unconsciously. The movement alone carried years of trust inside it. Ethan rubbed behind the shepherd's ear slowly. "You hear that, mate? You are not done yet." Rex's tail thumped faintly once against the wet concrete. Noah watched the exchange silently beneath the thermal blanket before speaking again. "He barked every time I cried." Ethan turned toward him carefully. "What do you mean?" The boy stared toward the dark water beyond the pier supports. "After the fire, I thought everyone forgot me." His voice trembled slightly. "It was dark under here. Really dark." Rain tapped softly through gaps above them, while the harbor wind drifted cold beneath the platform. Noah tightened the blanket around himself. "Then I heard barking." Ethan felt his chest tighten again. "Rex found you." Noah nodded slowly. "I was scared because he looked hurt at first, but he kept nudging me awake." The child managed the faintest smile through exhaustion. He even growled at the rats when they came close. Mia lowered her eyes briefly, emotion flickering across her face before she looked away toward the rain. Some stories were too human to survive without kindness appearing somewhere inside them. Tonight that kindness had arrived on 4 exhausted paws beneath a ruined pier. More officers moved through the dockyard now, while floodlights illuminated the damaged warehouse behind them. Ethan could finally see the destruction properly beneath the shifting stormlight. Collapsed steel beams, blackened cargo containers, pools of water reflecting emergency lights like shattered mirrors. The place looked hollowed out, broken, yet somehow life had survived inside it anyway. Mia's radio crackled suddenly against her shoulder. She stepped aside briefly to answer while Ethan remained with Rex and Noah. The shepherd had finally lowered himself onto the concrete again beside the boy, though his eyes never fully closed. Watching, guarding, staying. Ethan rested against one of the support beams carefully, fatigue beginning to drag heavily through his injured body now that the crisis had eased. His hands still trembled slightly from adrenaline and pain. But beneath all of it sat something unfamiliar. Gratitude. Deep enough to hurt. Noah looked toward the tattoo on Ethan's right forearm, where rainwater still glistened across the faded image of a German shepherd. That is him, is it not? Ethan glanced down at the tattoo and smiled faintly for the first time in days. Yeah. Noah studied Rex quietly. You must really love him. Ethan's eyes shifted back toward the shepherd resting against the boy's side. For several seconds he did not answer. Then softly, almost to himself, he said, "He saved me long before tonight." The wind shifted suddenly across the harbor, carrying the distant scent of salt water and wet eucalyptus drifting from somewhere beyond the city. Melbourne felt strangely quiet now despite the sirens and flashing lights. Like the storm itself had softened after witnessing something sacred beneath the dock. Mia returned a moment later with a more serious expression. "Noah's parents have been found," she said gently. "They have been searching hospitals since yesterday." Noah's eyes widened instantly. "Mum is okay. She is safe," Mia assured him. Relief crossed the boy's face so suddenly it almost looked painful. He lowered his head and began crying quietly beneath the thermal blanket. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the exhausted tears of someone finally discovering they no longer had to survive alone. Rex lifted his head immediately and nudged Noah's arm with his nose the moment the child started trembling. The simple gesture nearly broke Ethan apart all over again. Even injured, even exhausted beyond reason, the shepherd still comforted others first. One of the firefighters standing nearby shook his head slowly in disbelief. "That dog stayed down here all night protecting a stranger." Ethan looked toward Rex beneath the dock lights reflecting softly across wet fur and tired amber eyes. "No," he said quietly. "Not a stranger." The firefighter frowned slightly. Ethan's hand rested gently against Rex's neck again. Someone who needed him. For a while nobody spoke after that. Rain continued falling softly across Docklands while the first faint traces of dawn slowly began appearing behind the clouds over Port Phillip Bay. Dark blue softened into silver at the edge of the horizon. The longest night was finally ending. Rex lifted his tired head toward the changing sky, as if noticing it too. Ethan followed the shepherd's gaze quietly. Then slowly, with care usually reserved for sacred things, he leaned forward and rested his forehead against Rex's once more. No speeches, no dramatic words, just silence shared between two survivors who had found each other again in the dark. Morning arrived slowly over Melbourne Harbour, not with sunlight at first, but with color returning to the world one shade at a time. The violent storm clouds drifting above Docklands softened from charcoal black into bruised blue, while pale silver light crept across the surface of Port Phillip Bay. Rain still fell lightly, but the fury had gone from it now. What remained was quiet, the kind that follows survival. Emergency crews continued moving around Pier 9 with measured urgency, while investigators documented the warehouse collapse beneath portable floodlights. Yet beneath the damaged loading platform where Rex had guarded Noah through the long freezing night, everything felt strangely still compared to the noise beyond the barriers. Ethan Calloway sat against a rusted steel support beam with exhaustion dragging heavily through his injured body. His ribs burned every time he inhaled too deeply, and dried blood stained the edge of his hospital bandages beneath the police jacket. But he barely noticed anymore. Rex lay stretched beside him on the wet concrete, finally allowing his eyes to close properly for the first time since being found. The shepherd's breathing had steadied, though faint tremors still moved occasionally through his tired body whenever thunder rumbled far across the bay. Ethan rested one hand gently against the dog's neck, fingers buried deep in damp sable fur, keeping contact, making sure this was real. Noah had already been escorted toward an ambulance further up the pier where social workers and paramedics waited beside heated blankets and hot tea. Yet before leaving, the boy had crouched beside Rex one final time despite the cold and kissed the shepherd softly between the ears. "Thank you for staying," he whispered. Rex had opened his eyes just long enough to nudge the child's shoulder once with his nose before settling again beside Ethan. The memory sat quietly inside Ethan now like a small light refusing to go out. Mia Hart returned from speaking with investigators near the warehouse perimeter carrying 2 paper cups steaming faintly in the cold harbor air. She handed one carefully to Ethan before lowering herself beside him against the beam. "Terrible coffee," she muttered. Ethan accepted the cup anyway. "Tastes like survival." That earned the faintest smile from her. Around them, gulls circled above the docks while cranes creaked softly in the morning wind. The city skyline beyond the harbor looked washed clean by rain, glass towers catching the first traces of weak dawn light beneath drifting mist. Melbourne had survived another storm. So had they. Mia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup for warmth before speaking quietly. Noah's mother asked about the dog. Ethan glanced down toward Rex immediately. "What did you tell her?" "That her son is alive because your partner refused to quit." Ethan swallowed against the tightness in his throat. Rex shifted slightly at the sound of his voice, one ear twitching without fully waking. Mia looked toward the shepherd for a long moment. "You know," she said softly, "most dogs would have run from a fire like that." Ethan stared across the harbor water while steam rose slowly from the coffee in his hands. Rex stopped being just a dog years ago. A light breeze moved through the pier carrying the scent of salt water, diesel, and wet timber. Familiar smells. Dock smells. The kind that cling to uniforms long after shifts end. Ethan closed his eyes briefly and memory returned again in fragments. Rex during training exercises near Geelong, sprinting through obstacle courses faster than younger dogs twice as eager. Rex sitting beside Ethan outside a quiet country servo after a failed search operation 3 years ago, refusing to leave his side until sunrise. Rex barking once outside Ethan's flat after nights where silence became too heavy to survive alone. Loyalty had 1,000 small shapes before it ever became heroism. Mia leaned her head back lightly against the steel beam and exhaled slowly. "When they call me to the hospital tonight," she paused briefly, "I thought I was coming to stop a grieving man from doing something stupid." Ethan glanced sideways at her. "And now?" Mia looked toward Rex sleeping against the wet concrete beside them. "Now I think that dog dragged all of us back here for a reason." Somewhere behind them, an investigator shouted instructions near the warehouse ruins while forklifts beeped softly in the distance. The city was waking up again. Yet under the dock, wrapped inside the fading hush after chaos, Ethan felt separated from the world somehow. Like life had narrowed down to simple things. Breath, rain, fur beneath his fingertips, a partner alive beside him. Rex stirred suddenly, then lifted his head weakly, ears twitching toward the open pier. Ethan followed the shepherd's gaze. Noah stood near the ambulance beside a woman wrapped tightly in a cream-colored coat despite the cold. His mother. Her face looked exhausted from fear and sleeplessness, but relief softened every movement now. Noah waved toward Rex immediately. The shepherd's tail struck gently against the concrete once, then twice. Ethan smiled faintly. Noah broke free from the blanket around his shoulders and hurried back across the dock despite paramedics calling after him. He stopped in front of Rex, breathing hard from the run. "Mom says we can visit him when he gets better." Rex lifted his tired eyes toward the boy quietly. Noah crouched beside him again and carefully pulled something from his pocket. A small knitted blue bracelet soaked from rainwater. "This fell off me under the pier," the boy explained softly. He kept it with him. Ethan stared down in surprise as Noah looped the bracelet gently around Rex's collar beside the burnt police tag. The little blue thread looked fragile against scorched leather and dark fur. Yet somehow it belonged there. A reminder. Proof that somebody small and frightened had survived because a wounded shepherd refused to leave him behind in the dark. Noah hugged his mother tightly after that as they finally walked back toward the ambulance together. Rex watched until they disappeared beyond the emergency vehicles before lowering his head slowly onto Ethan's boot with a tired sigh. Ethan stared down at the dog quietly while weak dawn sunlight finally broke through the clouds over Port Phillip Bay for the first time all morning. Golden light spilled across the wet harbor water, across the ruined warehouse, across the exhausted shepherd lying against his feet. Grace arriving quietly after suffering. No speeches, no medals, just warmth returning to the world one careful inch at a time. Ethan rested his hand gently against Rex's side and whispered the only truth that mattered anymore. "You came back." By mid-morning the rain had finally stopped over Docklands, leaving the harbor washed clean beneath a pale winter sun that struggled through drifting clouds. The sharp smell of seawater lingered over Pier 9, while cleanup crews continued moving carefully through the damaged warehouse ruins. Portable generators hummed softly beside emergency vehicles, and gulls circled overhead as if the storm had never happened at all. But for Ethan Calloway, everything had changed. He sat in the back of a veterinary response van parked near the pier entrance, while Rex rested on a thick wool blanket beside him. Beneath the careful hands of Dr. Isla Bennett, the emergency veterinarian assigned to police rescue operations. The inside of the van smelled faintly of antiseptic, wet fur, and eucalyptus balm. Warmth filled the small space after the freezing night beneath the docks. Rex remained unusually still during the examination, though every so often his amber eyes drifted toward Ethan as if checking that he was still there. Ethan kept one hand resting gently against the shepherd's shoulder the entire time. Neither of them seemed willing to lose contact again. Dr. Bennett adjusted the torch clipped near her collar while inspecting the burns along Rex's side. She looked to be in her early 40s, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and tired green eyes softened by years of treating frightened animals. "He is tougher than most people I know," she murmured quietly. Ethan managed the faintest smile. "That sounds about right." Rex's tail moved weakly once at the sound of Ethan's voice. Dr. Bennett cleaned one of the deeper cuts along the shepherd's paw carefully while speaking in the calm tone people reserve for creatures they respect deeply. "The remarkable part is not the injuries," she said. "It is how long he stayed alert afterward." Ethan looked down at Rex immediately. The shepherd's breathing remained heavy from exhaustion, but his eyes stayed focused despite everything his body had endured. "Adrenaline?" Ethan asked softly. Dr. Bennett shook her head slightly. "Purpose." The words settled heavily inside the quiet van. Ethan glanced toward the open rear doors where sunlight shimmered faintly across the wet docks outside. Purpose. That was exactly what had kept Rex alive beneath the ruined pier. Not instinct. Not training alone. The need to protect someone smaller than himself. Dr. Bennett wrapped a fresh bandage around Rex's paw before finally leaning back with a slow exhale. "He will recover," she said gently. Relief moved visibly through Ethan's face for the first time all morning. Dr. Bennett noticed immediately. "You were preparing yourself for worse." Ethan stared at Rex quietly for several seconds before answering. "I already thought I lost him once." Outside the van, footsteps approached across wet asphalt. Mia Hart appeared moments later carrying a paper bag from a nearby cafe, steam rising from takeaway cups balanced carefully in one hand. "Coffee and something pretending to be breakfast," she announced softly while climbing into the van. The smell of warm meat pies filled the small space instantly. Ethan suddenly realized he had not eaten since before the warehouse operation. Mia handed one cup toward Dr. Bennett before sitting opposite Ethan near the van doors. Her blonde hair remained damp from the harbor air, though exhaustion had eased slightly from her expression now that daylight had arrived. "Noah and his mother left an hour ago," she said quietly. Ethan looked up immediately. "How is he?" "Cold. Shaken up. But safe." Mia smiled faintly. Apparently, he told every paramedic in the ambulance that a police dog saved his life. Ethan looked down toward Rex again. The shepherd had finally closed his eyes properly now, resting his head against Ethan's knee while sunlight touched the edge of his dark fur through the open van doors. Dr. Bennett followed Ethan's gaze thoughtfully. "Dogs like him do not come along often." Mia nodded slowly. "You should have seen the rescue crews when they realized he stayed under there with the boy all night." Her voice softened. "Half the blokes looked ready to cry." Ethan stared quietly at the knitted blue bracelet still looped around Rex's burnt collar. Rainwater had dried stiffly into the thread now, but the color remained bright against dark leather. A child's small thank you tied beside the scars of survival. Dr. Bennett packed away medical supplies carefully before pausing beside Rex one final time. "He needs rest," she said gently. "Real rest. Warmth. Quiet. Probably a week without trying to save the world." Ethan scratched softly behind Rex's ear. That might be the difficult part. Rex's tail tapped faintly against the blanket again without opening his eyes. The movement drew soft laughter from Mia for the first time since the storm began. Outside the van, Melbourne continued waking beneath pale winter sunlight. Cargo ships moved slowly through the harbor in the distance while trams rattled faintly somewhere beyond the docks. Ordinary life returning inch by inch after disaster. Yet inside the small veterinary van, time still felt slower somehow. Sacred almost. Ethan sipped carefully from the coffee cup, warming his hands while watching Rex sleep. The shepherd twitched slightly in his dreams now and then, paws moving faintly against the blanket, as if still searching through smoke and darkness beneath the pier. Ethan rested his palm gently against the dog's neck each time it happened. "Easy, mate," he whispered. "You are safe now." Dr. Bennett studied them quietly before speaking again. "You know he searched for you too." Ethan looked up. "What do you mean?" "When rescue crews first approached the lower dock area this morning, he refused to leave the platform." She smiled faintly. "One firefighter said the dog kept staring toward the city every few minutes like he was waiting for someone." Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. He remembered the bark outside the hospital window. The impossible sound carried through storm and distance. Rex had been calling for him. Mia lowered her coffee cup slowly. "Funny thing about loyalty," she murmured. "Sometimes it sounds a lot like faith." Silence settled softly inside the van after that. Warm, gentle. Beyond the open doors, sunlight glimmered across wet concrete and harbor water while gulls cried overhead beneath the clearing sky. Ethan looked down at the exhausted German shepherd sleeping against him and understood something he had spent years trying not to admit. Some bonds survive because they are useful. Others survive because somewhere along the way they become part of the soul itself. Rex shifted closer in his sleep, then released a long, tired breath against Ethan's leg. And for the first time in a very long while, Ethan no longer felt alone. 3 days later, winter sunlight spilled softly across the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, while the city slowly settled back into ordinary rhythm after the storm. Trams rattled through damp streets. Cafes reopened beneath striped awnings still dripping rainwater. Along quiet residential roads lined with eucalyptus and jacaranda trees, magpies called through the cool morning air as if nothing remarkable had happened at all. But inside a small weatherboard house overlooking the Yarra River, healing moved carefully through silence, one breath at a time. Ethan Calloway stood barefoot in the kitchen wearing a faded gray jumper and track pants while steam curled from a kettle near the stove. His ribs still ached sharply beneath the bandages each time he reached too far, and dark bruising lingered beneath one eye from the warehouse collapse. Yet for the first time in months, maybe years, the house no longer felt empty. Near the sliding glass doors leading toward the back veranda, Rex slept stretched across an old wool blanket beneath a patch of winter sunlight. The German shepherd's paws remained wrapped in fresh veterinary bandages, and shaved patches along his shoulder revealed slowly healing burns beneath the sable fur. But his breathing had steadied now. Peaceful. Safe. Ethan glanced toward him every few seconds anyway. Not from fear anymore. From gratitude. A soft knock sounded at the front door. Rex's ears lifted instantly, though the shepherd remained lying down. Ethan smiled faintly. "Still on duty, eh?" Rex's tail moved once against the blanket. Ethan crossed the small hallway slowly and opened the door to find Mia Hart standing outside, holding a paper tray of takeaway coffees and a brown bakery bag, releasing the smell of warm pastries into the cold air. "Doctor's orders," she announced while stepping inside. "Apparently recovering officers require carbohydrates." Ethan accepted the bag with a quiet laugh. "You realize you are becoming impossible to get rid of." "Correct." Mia slipped off her damp boots near the entrance before glancing toward Rex resting by the glass doors. Her expression softened immediately. "How is our miracle shepherd this morning?" Rex lifted his head at the sound of her voice, amber eyes calmer now than they had been at the docks. The knitted blue bracelet still rested loosely beside his burnt police tag on the collar around his neck. Mia crouched beside him carefully and scratched behind one ear. "You look less like roadkill today, mate." Rex responded with a low, rumbling sound that almost resembled approval. Ethan moved toward the kitchen while weak sunlight filtered across the timber floors. The house smelled faintly of coffee, antiseptic cream, and wet eucalyptus drifting through the cracked veranda door. Small comforting things. Signs of life returning. Mia followed him toward the kitchen bench while pulling folded papers from beneath her jacket. "Investigation update," she said quietly. Ethan's shoulders tensed slightly. "Anything useful?" Mia nodded once. "The trafficking operation tied to the warehouse has been shut down completely. Half the crew vanished after the fire, but detectives recovered enough evidence from the cargo manifests to start making arrests." Ethan leaned against the bench carefully, listening while the kettle hissed softly nearby. And the anonymous tip? Mia placed the papers down slowly. Turns out it came from one of the victims. Ethan looked up immediately. Noah. No, Mia shook her head. An older teenage girl they found hiding in another shipping container after the collapse. She escaped during the storm. A quiet silence settled briefly through the kitchen. Outside, wind moved gently through the gum trees near the riverbank. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. So many frightened people hidden inside one ruined warehouse. So many lives balanced unknowingly between loss and survival. Mia lowered her voice slightly. Detectives think Noah had been moved through the cargo route and escaped into the restricted area during the evacuation chaos after the fire alarms triggered. Ethan glanced instinctively toward Rex. And Rex found him first. Mia smiled softly. Looks that way. In the living room, Rex slowly pushed himself upright onto unsteady paws before limping carefully toward the kitchen. Ethan immediately stepped forward to support him out of habit, but the shepherd nudged past gently and lowered himself beside the kitchen table instead. Staying close. Always close now. Mia watched the movement quietly. You know he has barely taken his eyes off you since the rescue. Ethan crouched slowly despite the pain in his ribs and rested a hand along Rex's neck. Pretty sure it goes both ways. Rex leaned into the touch immediately. Outside the rear windows, pale winter light shimmered across the Yarra while clouds drifted slowly above the city's skyline in the distance. Calm after chaos. Ethan had almost forgotten such mornings existed. Mia sipped from her coffee thoughtfully before speaking again. There is one more thing. Ethan looked up. What? The department wants to formally recognize Rex's actions at the docks. Ethan frowned slightly. Recognition how? Mia smiled faintly. Ceremony. Citation. Media attention. Probably enough cameras to terrify him. At the mention of his name, Rex's ears twitched though he remained resting quietly against Ethan's leg. Ethan looked down at the shepherd for several seconds before answering softly. He did not save that boy for applause. I know. Mia's voice gentled. But maybe people need reminding that loyalty like this still exists. The words lingered quietly in the warm kitchen air. Ethan glanced toward the burnt collar beside the blue bracelet resting against Rex's thick fur. Scars and kindness tied together. Survival and innocence beside one another. Maybe Mia was right. Maybe the world did need stories like this now. Stories where something good stayed behind in the dark long enough to guide another soul home. Rex shifted suddenly and rested his heavy head against Ethan's knee with a tired sigh. Ethan scratched behind the shepherd's ears slowly while sunlight touched both of them through the kitchen windows. No flashing lights. No sirens. No storms tonight. Just quiet. Healing. The kind that arrives softly after people and animals survive things that should have broken them apart. Somewhere down the street, children laughed faintly while a tram bell echoed through the cool Melbourne morning. Life moving forward again. Ethan looked down at Rex one more time and whispered the truth neither of them needed explained anymore. We are still here, mate. The ceremony was scheduled for a cold Thursday morning, nearly 3 weeks after the storm at Docklands, though Melbourne weather seemed undecided about whether winter intended to leave quietly or not. Gray clouds drifted low across the city skyline, while weak sunlight spilled occasionally between them, painting silver patches along the Yarra River outside Victoria Police Headquarters. News vans lined part of the street near the entrance, their satellite dishes pointed toward the pale sky, while journalists stood wrapped in coats clutching takeaway coffees against the morning chill. Inside the building, however, the atmosphere felt calmer, softer, the kind of quiet reserved for moments people know they will remember long after speeches fade. Ethan Calloway adjusted the collar of his dark navy dress uniform carefully while standing near one of the tall windows overlooking the river. His ribs had mostly healed now, though certain movements still carried faint reminders of the warehouse collapse. A thin scar remained along his jaw from falling debris, and exhaustion still lingered beneath his eyes on difficult nights. But today something else sat there too. Peace, perhaps, or gratitude finally settling into places grief used to live. Beside him, Rex sat upright on the polished timber floor wearing a freshly brushed tactical harness clipped neatly over his sable coat. Most of the burns had healed beneath the thick fur now, though one faint patch near the shoulder remained visible in the right light. The burnt collar still rested around his neck beneath the harness, and beside the metal police tag hung Noah's small blue bracelet. Ethan had tried removing it once while cleaning the collar. Rex had immediately nudged his hand away, so the bracelet stayed. Mia Hart appeared from the hallway carrying 2 cups of coffee while balancing a clipboard beneath one arm. "The media outside is behaving like someone invited royalty," she muttered while handing Ethan a cup. Ethan glanced toward Rex. "Pretty sure they are here for him." Rex lifted one ear at the sound of Ethan's voice, but otherwise remained perfectly composed. Mia smiled faintly. "He is handling fame better than most officers I know." Through the nearby doorway, muffled sounds drifted from the assembly hall, where chairs scraped lightly against the floor and quiet conversations echoed beneath high ceilings. Families of officers had already begun arriving. Rescue crews from Docklands, emergency responders, even some firefighters who searched Pier 9 during the storm. People connected by one impossible night beneath the harbor rain. Ethan stared through the window toward the river while steam rose from his coffee. "You know what bothers me?" Mia leaned against the wall beside him. "What?" "Everyone keeps calling Rex a hero." Mia blinked slowly. "Because he is." Ethan lowered his eyes toward the shepherd sitting calmly at his side. He never cared about being brave. His fingers drifted absent-mindedly across the faded German shepherd tattoo wrapped around his right forearm. He just stayed. The words lingered quietly between them. Mia looked down at Rex thoughtfully. Maybe that is what bravery actually is. Before Ethan could answer, a small voice echoed suddenly from the hallway behind them. "Mr. Calloway?" Ethan turned immediately. Noah stood there holding tightly onto his mother's hand, while wearing a Navy school jumper slightly too large for him. His dark hair had finally been cut neatly again after weeks of recovery, and color had returned to his face beneath the soft hallway lights. But the moment Rex saw him, everything changed. The German shepherd rose instantly despite his training and crossed the polished floor toward the boy with sudden eager energy that startled everyone nearby. Noah laughed softly as Rex pressed his nose against the child's chest before sitting directly in front of him like they had known each other for years instead of surviving one terrible night together. Ethan watched silently while Noah wrapped both arms around the shepherd's neck. "I brought you something," the boy whispered. Noah's mother smiled apologetically while he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Childish crayon lines covered the page. A drawing of a German shepherd beneath a storm cloud standing beside a small figure wrapped in blue. Across the top, uneven handwriting read, "Thank you for staying with me." Ethan felt his throat tighten instantly. Rex sniffed the paper carefully before licking Noah's hand once with solemn gentleness. "I think he likes it," Mia whispered softly beside Ethan. Noah crouched lower. Beside the shepherd. "Mum says storms scare me less now." Rex's ears twitched slightly as though listening carefully. Noah smiled. "Because if dogs like you exist, maybe bad things do not win forever." For a moment nobody spoke after that. Not Ethan. Not Mia. Not Noah's mother quietly wiping at her eyes. Sometimes truth arrives through children because adults become too tired to say it plainly anymore. A loudspeaker crackled gently through the hallway overhead. "Ceremony attendees, please take your seats." People slowly began moving toward the assembly hall while soft conversations filled the corridor. Noah hugged Rex one final time before following his mother inside. The shepherd watched carefully until they disappeared through the doorway. Then he returned calmly to Ethan's side without command, loyal as breathing itself. Mia exhaled softly beside them. "You still think this ceremony is unnecessary?" Ethan looked down at the drawing folded carefully in Rex's mouth now. The shepherd carried it with surprising delicacy between his teeth, like something precious. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe not. Through the assembly hall doors beyond them, sunlight spilled across polished floors, while rows of waiting chairs filled steadily with people from every corner of the city touched by that stormy night at Docklands. Officers, firefighters, paramedics, families, survivors. Ordinary souls gathered quietly because one wounded shepherd refused to abandon a frightened child in the dark. Ethan rested his hand gently against Rex's neck, while together they stepped toward the light spilling through the doorway. No music swelled. No grand announcement echoed yet. Just the sound of boots against timber floors and a dog walking faithfully beside the man he had already saved more than once. The assembly hall inside Victoria Police Headquarters carried the warm hush of hundreds of people trying not to speak too loudly about something sacred. Sunlight filtered through tall windows overlooking the Yarra River, washing pale gold across polished timber floors and rows of dark blue chairs filled with officers, firefighters, paramedics, and families still connected by the memory of one stormy night at Docklands. The scent of fresh coffee drifted softly through the room alongside damp wool coats and polished leather boots drying from the cold Melbourne morning outside. At the front of the hall stood a simple stage draped with the Victoria Police flag. No dramatic banners, no oversized screens, just quiet dignity. Ethan Callaway sat in the second row beside Mia Hart, while Rex rested calmly at his feet, wearing the same tactical harness from the rescue. The shepherd remained unusually composed despite the crowded room around him. Occasionally his amber eyes moved across the audience carefully, alert but peaceful now. The blue bracelet tied beside his burnt collar shifted slightly each time he breathed. Noah sat 2 rows ahead beside his mother, turning around every few seconds just to smile nervously toward Rex, as though still reassuring himself the dog was truly there. A senior commissioner stepped toward the lectern at the front of the hall, while conversations gradually faded into silence. The older man removed his glasses slowly before speaking, his voice carrying the rough warmth of someone who had spent decades witnessing both the best and worst parts of humanity. There are moments in this profession, he began quietly, when courage arrives exactly where we expect it. His eyes drifted briefly toward the rows of uniformed officers seated throughout the hall. And then there are moments when courage surprises us completely. Silence settled deeper through the room. Outside the tall windows, winter clouds drifted slowly above the river, while faint traffic sounds moved somewhere beyond the city streets. The commissioner continued softly. 3 weeks ago, during the Docklands Pier 9 disaster, emergency crews searched through storm conditions, believing all survivors had been evacuated from the collapsed warehouse zone. He paused briefly. What they did not know was that beneath a damaged loading platform, a wounded police dog had chosen to remain beside a frightened child throughout the longest winter night this city has seen in years. Ethan lowered his eyes toward Rex quietly while the hall remained completely still around them. The commissioner looked toward Noah sitting near the front. That child is alive today because loyalty refused to leave him alone in the dark. Noah's mother wiped gently beneath her eyes while Noah sat straighter in his seat, hands folded tightly together. Nearby, several firefighters who had searched the docks lowered their heads, silently remembering the storm, the flooded concrete, the barking carried through rain and harbor wind. The commissioner stepped away from the lectern, then approached the edge of the stage holding a small velvet presentation box. Senior Tactical Officer Ethan Callaway and Police K9 Rex. Ethan stood slowly while Rex rose immediately beside him, without command. Together they walked toward the stage through the silent hall, boots and paws moving softly across polished timber floors beneath the warm winter light. No applause yet, just respect. Deep and still. Ethan stopped beside the commissioner while Rex sat calmly at his side, eyes fixed upward toward his partner the entire time. The commissioner opened the velvet box, carefully revealing a silver citation medal engraved with the Victoria Police crest. This commendation recognizes extraordinary courage, devotion to duty, and the preservation of innocent life under catastrophic conditions. His voice softened further then. But truthfully, no medal could fully explain what this dog gave back to all of us. A faint ripple moved through the audience. Not noise. Emotion. Quiet and human. The commissioner crouched slowly despite his age until he stood level with Rex himself. For one brief moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Then gently, carefully, the commissioner attached the medal beside the burnt collar and Noah's blue bracelet already resting against Rex's neck. Medal beside ash. Honor beside innocence. Survival beside love. Rex remained perfectly still throughout it all. Only his tail moved once against the timber floor when Ethan's hand settled softly against the back of his neck afterward. The hall finally erupted into applause then. Not loud at first. Warm. Rising gradually until the sound filled the entire room like rain returning after drought. Officers stood. Firefighters stood. Families rose from their chairs, wiping tears openly now while applause echoed against the high ceilings beneath drifting winter sunlight. Noah clapped hardest of all. Ethan looked around the hall slowly, overwhelmed in a way no tactical operation had ever managed to accomplish. So many strangers brought together by one exhausted shepherd who simply refused to abandon somebody afraid. Rex glanced up at Ethan during the applause as if confused why everyone suddenly seemed emotional. Ethan laughed quietly through the tightness in his throat and knelt beside him without caring about ceremony anymore. "Good boy," he whispered softly against the shepherd's fur. "Always a good boy." Rex leaned gently into him beneath the applause and sunlight pouring through the tall windows. Cameras flashed somewhere near the back of the hall, but the moment no longer belonged to journalists or headlines now. It belonged to every person in that room who still needed reminding that goodness survives, that loyalty survives, that sometimes grace arrives quietly on four tired paws through stormwater and smoke. When the applause finally softened, Noah suddenly stepped away from his seat near the front row and walked carefully toward the stage, carrying something folded beneath one arm. The entire hall watched curiously as he stopped beside Rex once more. "Mom helped me make this," he said shyly. He unfolded a small knitted blanket stitched from dark blue wool, with one simple phrase sewn carefully into the center in uneven silver thread. "Still here." Ethan felt tears sting his eyes before he could stop them. Noah wrapped the blanket gently across Rex's shoulders while the shepherd looked calmly between the child and his partner without moving. The commissioner cleared his throat quietly beside them before speaking one final time. "Some stories do not end in victory." He glanced toward Rex beneath the sunlight. "They end in grace." The weeks after the ceremony passed gently, almost cautiously, as though life itself understood that some wounds needed quiet more than celebration. Melbourne settled deeper into winter beneath soft gray skies and cold mornings scented with rain on asphalt. Along the Yarra River, bare branches trembled in the wind, while ferries cut slowly through dark water beneath the city lights each evening. The headlines about Docklands faded gradually from television screens and newspapers. Journalists moved on to newer stories. Crowds forgot. But inside Ethan Calloway's small weatherboard house overlooking the river, the rescue remained present in smaller ways every single day. Rex had recovered enough to walk properly again by the middle of July, though a slight stiffness lingered in his shoulder during colder mornings. Ethan noticed it immediately each time the shepherd rose from his blanket near the veranda doors. Without fail, Rex would pretend nothing hurt while following him room to room anyway. Loyalty does not retire simply because pain arrives. One quiet Saturday morning, pale sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows while rain tapped softly against the roof. Ethan stood at the bench slicing toast while the kettle steamed beside him. The house smelled of coffee and damp eucalyptus drifting through the cracked veranda door. Rex rested nearby, watching every movement with the calm patience of a creature finally learning what safety feels like again. A gentle knock sounded at the front door. Rex's ears lifted instantly before his tail began tapping softly against the timber floor. Ethan smiled faintly. "You already know who it is, do you?" He opened the door to find Noah standing there bundled inside a thick navy jacket beside his mother, both carrying grocery bags and wearing expressions somewhere between nervousness and hope. Rainwater clung to Noah's dark fringe while winter wind pushed softly through the gum trees along the street. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced," his mother said warmly. Noah insisted Rex might miss him. Ethan looked down just as the shepherd pushed carefully past his leg toward the doorway. Noah laughed immediately when Rex pressed his nose against the boy's chest with unmistakable affection. "I think that answers the question," Ethan said softly. They spent the afternoon together while rain drifted steadily across Melbourne outside. Noah sat cross-legged on the living room rug brushing Rex's fur gently while Ethan and Noah's mother shared coffee at the kitchen table nearby. The television remained off. No phones buzzing. Just warmth, rain, and the quiet comfort of people no longer carrying fear alone. At one point Noah held up a new drawing proudly toward Ethan. This one showed Rex standing beneath sunlight instead of storm clouds. Beside the shepherd stood 3 figures now instead of 1. "That is us," Noah explained shyly. Ethan studied the drawing carefully before smiling in a way that reached his eyes completely for the first time in years. Looks pretty accurate to me. Rex rested his head across Noah's lap during the conversation that followed, breathing deeply while the boy absent-mindedly scratched behind his ears. Noah glanced down toward the burnt collar and silver medal resting beside the blue bracelet around the shepherd's neck. Does he know he is famous now? Ethan laughed quietly from the kitchen doorway. Mate, he still tries to steal sausages off the barbecue. I do not think fame changed him much. Noah grinned. Good. Outside, rain softened further into mist while evening shadows settled across the riverbank beyond the veranda. Somewhere nearby, a magpie called through the cold air. The world felt smaller tonight in the best possible way. Human again. Later, as Noah and his mother prepared to leave, the boy crouched beside Rex one last time near the front door. Mum says we might move closer to the city next year, he said softly while rubbing the shepherd's neck. But I told her we cannot move too far away from Melbourne now. Ethan leaned lightly against the doorway. Why is that? Noah looked up with complete seriousness. Because heroes live here. The words landed quietly inside the room. Simple, honest, true in the way only children manage to be. Noah's mother rested a gentle hand on Ethan's arm before leaving. You gave my son his nights back, she whispered. Ethan shook his head immediately. Rex did that. She smiled softly through tired eyes. Maybe, but some people are only brave because someone else taught them how. After they left, silence returned gently to the house, while rain drifted faintly against the windows. Once more, Ethan stood alone near the veranda doors for a long moment watching headlights disappear down the wet street outside. Then he felt familiar weight settle quietly against his leg. Rex. Ethan looked down at the shepherd standing beside him beneath the warm kitchen light. The silver medal glimmered faintly beside the burnt collar and blue bracelet. Scars beside grace. Memory beside healing. Ethan crouched carefully despite the ache still lingering in his ribs and rested both hands along Rex's face. You know, he whispered softly. For a while there, I thought that storm took everything. Rex blinked slowly, calm amber eyes never leaving his. Outside, the rain finally stopped completely. Ethan smiled faintly, then rested his forehead against the shepherd's once more. Turns out, he murmured, it brought something back too. Rex's tail moved gently against the timber floor while warm light filled the small riverside house, and winter night settled peacefully around them. Spring arrived quietly across Melbourne that year, slipping into the city through warmer winds and longer evenings rather than dramatic change. The gum trees along the Yarra River carried fresh green again, and jacaranda blossoms began scattering purple across footpaths still stained dark from months of winter rain. Along the riverside walking tracks near Ethan Calloway's neighborhood, cyclists moved through golden afternoon light while families gathered beneath flowering trees with takeaway coffees and fish and chips wrapped in paper. Life had softened, healed in places nobody noticed at first glance. On a mild Sunday evening nearly 4 months after the storm at Docklands, Ethan walked slowly beside the river with Rex pacing calmly at his side beneath the fading sunlight. The shepherd's coat had fully recovered now, thick and healthy beneath the warm breeze moving across the water. Only the faint stiffness in his shoulder remained during colder mornings, but even that had eased with time. Around his neck rested the same collar he never removed anymore. Burnt leather, silver medal, blue bracelet, scars and grace carried together. Ethan wore a dark green flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled above his forearms, revealing the faded German shepherd tattoo along his right arm. People still occasionally recognized Rex from the news coverage surrounding the Docklands rescue. Some smiled quietly. Others stopped to thank the dog directly in soft, embarrassed voices. Rex handled all of it with the same calm dignity he handled everything else. He accepted kindness briefly, then returned his attention to Ethan as though the rest of the world existed somewhere far away. Tonight, the riverside path glowed amber beneath the lowering sun, while boats drifted slowly through the Yarra carrying tourists toward the city. Somewhere nearby, a busker played soft acoustic guitar beneath the pedestrian bridge. The music floated gently through the evening air, blending with distant laughter and the steady rhythm of water against the riverbank. Ethan paused beside a weathered wooden bench overlooking the river and sat carefully while Rex lowered himself onto the grass beside him with a long, relaxed breath. For several minutes, neither moved. They simply watched the sunset unfold slowly across Melbourne's skyline, while spring wine stirred through the trees overhead. Ethan had once feared silence, feared what waited inside it after difficult missions and sleepless nights. But silence felt different now, softer somehow, like peace no longer needed permission to stay. Footsteps approached along the riverside path behind them. Ethan glanced over his shoulder just as Noah appeared carrying a football beneath one arm, while his mother followed a few paces behind, holding ice creams already beginning to melt in the warm evening air. Rex's ears lifted instantly. Noah grinned the moment he spotted them. "There you are." The boy jogged toward the bench while Rex rose immediately to greet him, tail moving in broad, happy sweeps against the grass. Noah wrapped both arms around the shepherd's neck without hesitation. "Mom said you might be here." Ethan smiled faintly. "Your mom knows me too well." Noah's mother handed Ethan an ice cream before sitting beside him on the bench overlooking the river. "You two have become predictable," she teased softly. The evening light painted gold across the water while Rex settled beside Noah near the edge of the grass. The boy absent-mindedly scratched behind the shepherd's ears while talking excitedly about school football trials and an upcoming camping trip. Every so often Rex would glance up toward Ethan as if checking that everything remained all right before relaxing again beside the child. Ethan watched them quietly, something warm and almost painful settling inside his chest. For months ago, that boy had been alone beneath a ruined dock waiting for darkness to win. Now he laughed beside the river with sunlight on his face because one wounded shepherd refused to abandon him. Noah suddenly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. "I nearly forgot," he said excitedly. "My teacher took this during our excursion last week." He handed the photo carefully toward Ethan. It showed Noah standing proudly beside a classroom wall covered in student drawings. At the center hung the original crayon picture of Rex beneath the storm cloud with the words "Thank you for staying with me" written across the top. Around it, dozens of other children had added drawings of dogs, firefighters, police officers, and families beneath bright suns and blue skies. Ethan stared at the photograph silently for a long moment. Then softly he asked, "What is all this?" Noah smiled shyly while rubbing Rex's shoulder. "Our teacher said sometimes people need reminders that good things still happen." Ethan looked down at the shepherd beside them. Rex rested calmly against Noah's leg beneath the fading sunlight, eyes half closed in peaceful contentment. Good things. Maybe that was all Grace really was in the end. Not grand miracles falling from the sky, just small acts of loyalty refusing to disappear when the world grows cold. The buskers' music drifted softly across the river again, while evening shadows stretched longer beneath the trees. Noah's mother leaned gently against the back of the bench beside Ethan. "You know," she said quietly, "Noah sleeps through storms now." Ethan swallowed against the sudden tightness in his throat. "I am glad." She looked toward Rex with soft, tired eyes carrying gratitude too deep for simple words. "He gave more back to us than he will ever understand." The last sunlight of evening glimmered faintly against the silver metal resting beside Rex's burnt collar. The shepherd lifted his head slightly, then nudged Ethan's hand with his nose the way he always did whenever silence grew too heavy. Ethan smiled immediately and rested his palm against the side of Rex's face. Warm fur beneath fading sunlight. River wind moving gently through the trees. Somewhere nearby, children laughed while Melbourne settled softly into another ordinary evening. Ethan looked out across the glowing water and realized something simple at last. The storm at Docklands had not only spared them. In strange, quiet ways, it had led them home to one another. And for the first time, Ethan understood survival was not just escaping the dark, but finding a reason to walk back into the light. Summer arrived over Melbourne in slow golden waves, warming the city one long afternoon at a time until the memory of winter storms felt almost impossible beneath the brightness. Along the beaches near Street Kilda, children chased gulls across pale sand while music drifted from open cafes into streets carrying the scent of salt water and sunscreen. Ferries crossed Port Phillip Bay beneath cloudless skies, and warm evening winds stirred through the eucalyptus trees lining the quiet riverside suburb where Ethan Calloway still lived overlooking the Yarra. Nearly a year had passed since the night Docklands Pier 9 collapsed beneath thunder and rain. Yet some things remained exactly the same. Every morning before sunrise, Rex still waited patiently beside the front door while Ethan tied his boots. Every evening, the shepherd still performed one final slow patrol through the house before settling onto his blanket near the veranda doors. And during storms, no matter how distant the thunder sounded, Noah still received a short message from Ethan saying only 3 words. He is here. Tonight the air carried the soft warmth of late December, while golden sunsets spread across the river like spilled light. Ethan sat alone at the edge of the old wooden jetty behind his property, boots resting just above the slow, moving water beneath him. A fishing rod leaned untouched beside the railing, while cicadas hummed softly through the trees behind the house. Rex rested nearby with his head against Ethan's boot, eyes half closed beneath the fading sunlight. The shepherd had grown older somehow over the past year, not weaker, just gentler around the edges. Wiser perhaps. The silver medal still hung quietly beside the burnt collar and faded blue bracelet around his neck. Ethan reached down absent-mindedly and scratched behind Rex's ears while watching the sunset deepen across the river. "You know," he murmured softly, "I never thanked you properly." Rex opened one amber eye briefly before nudging Ethan's hand for more attention. Ethan laughed quietly beneath his breath. Fair point. Behind them, the screen door creaked open lightly. Mia Hart stepped barefoot onto the veranda carrying 2 cold bottles of lemonade, while warm wind moved loose strands of blonde hair across her face. She had stopped wearing her walls quite so tightly over the past year. Some griefs soften when shared beside honest people and good dogs. "You missed dinner again," she called gently. Ethan glanced back toward the house. "Lost track of time. You have been saying that since August." She crossed the grass toward the jetty and handed him one of the bottles before lowering herself beside him near the water's edge. Rex lifted his head long enough to greet her with a slow tail wag before settling again between them. The river reflected deep orange and gold beneath the evening sky, while somewhere farther downstream laughter drifted from another family gathered along the bank. Ordinary sounds. Peaceful sounds. The kind Ethan once believed would always belong to other people. Mia stared out across the glowing water quietly before speaking. Noah's mother called earlier. Ethan smiled faintly. "Everything all right?" Apparently, he won an award at school. Mia laughed softly. "Most improved student." Ethan looked down toward Rex immediately. "Guess your maid is rubbing off on him." Rex's tail moved once against the timber boards as if accepting the compliment. Silence settled comfortably between them after that. Not empty silence. The kind built from trust and time. Cicadas droned through the summer dusk while the last sunlight slipped lower behind Melbourne's distant skyline. Ethan took a slow breath of warm river air and realized something that still surprised him even now. The nightmares had mostly stopped. Not completely. Some scars stay hidden beneath the skin forever. But the darkness no longer felt endless after Docklands. Somewhere along the way, loyalty had pulled him back toward life one quiet day at a time. Mia rested her elbows on her knees while watching the water. "Do you ever think about that first bark outside the hospital?" Ethan's expression softened instantly. "Every day." He glanced down toward Rex, sleeping peacefully against his boot. "Sometimes I still wonder how he found me." Mia smiled faintly. "Maybe he never lost you in the first place." The words lingered gently in the warm evening air. Ethan looked toward the shepherd beside him beneath the fading sunlight. Burnt collar, blue bracelet, silver medal catching the last gold rays of day. Symbols of survival carried without pride or understanding. Rex had never cared about headlines or ceremonies. He only knew one thing with certainty. Stay beside the people who need you, even in the dark. Especially in the dark. A soft breeze moved across the river then, stirring the gum leaves overhead while sunset finally deepened into twilight blue. The first stars appeared faintly above Melbourne. Ethan rested one hand against Rex's neck and closed his eyes briefly, listening to the simple sounds surrounding him now. Water against wood. Summer insects singing in the trees. Slow breathing from the shepherd beside him. Life. Real life. The kind he thought he lost long ago. From somewhere farther downriver came the distant sound of a dog barking happily in the fading evening light. Rex lifted his head slightly at the noise, ears twitching once before relaxing again against Ethan's leg. Ethan smiled softly into the dusk. "Not every bark means danger anymore, mate." Rex exhaled slowly and settled closer beside him beneath the warm summer sky. The river carried gold reflections out toward the bay while night gathered peacefully around the little house overlooking the Yarra. No storms waited tonight. No collapsing roofs. No frightened child alone beneath a dock. Only stillness, healing, and the quiet grace of two survivors who found each other again when the world went dark. Some stories do not end with sirens or applause. They end with a man beside the river, a loyal dog at his feet, and the understanding that sometimes the smallest sound in the darkness can lead a soul all the way home. Not because it is loud, but because somewhere inside that sound is a promise. Stay alive a little longer, someone is still coming for you.